Someone running multiple accounts gets a flag on one of them, and the first fix they reach for is incognito mode, or flipping on a VPN. Neither one touches the actual problem. These three tools, an anti-detect browser, incognito mode, and a VPN, get lumped together constantly because they all sound like they're doing the same job. Hide who you are online. They are not. They operate on three completely different layers, and mixing them up, thinking one covers for the other, is exactly how people burn accounts they were trying to protect. For the fan mode, I run real proxy and cloud phone farms, and I test these three tools against each other constantly, because the confusion between them is one of the most common mistakes I see. I'm going to stay defensive and third person throughout, what each tool technically does and where it stops, not a script for beating any one platform's rules. Three different layers. Before comparing them directly, it helps to name the three layers separately, because each tool only ever answers one. There's local browsing privacy, what gets saved on your own machine. There's network origin, what IP address and rough location a site sees you connecting from. And there's device and browser identity, the pile of canvas, WebGL, font, and hardware signals that make one browser recognizable from another. An anti-detect browser, incognito mode, and a VPN each live almost entirely on one of these three layers, and none of them reach into the other two. What incognito actually does? Incognito, or private browsing, is a local feature. It opens a session that doesn't save history, cookies, or site data once you close the window. That's genuinely useful for one thing, keeping your own browsing habits off your own machine. But nothing about it changes what a remote site sees. Your IP address is identical to your normal browsing. Your canvas result, your WebGL string, your fonts, your time zone, every device signal a site can read is exactly the same as it is in your regular window. Incognito protects your local history. It does nothing at all for how a site identifies your browser. Why incognito fails at multi-accounting? This is why incognito is close to the worst option for anyone juggling multiple accounts on one machine. Not only does it fail to separate your fingerprint, it actively works against the one thing an operator actually needs: persistence. Log into 3 accounts across 3 incognito windows, and a site sees the identical fingerprint and the identical IP visiting all 3, which is the fastest possible way to get them linked. And because incognito wipes everything on close, there's no session for a platform to recognize as a normal returning visitor either. It solves a privacy problem nobody juggling accounts actually has, and ignores the identity problem they do have. What a VPN actually does. A VPN operates one layer over at the network. It routes your traffic through a server somewhere else and hands the site that server's IP address instead of your own. That changes your apparent location and whatever reputation comes attached to that IP, a real, meaningful shift. But the VPN touches nothing about the browser sitting on top of it. Your canvas result doesn't change. Your fonts don't change. Your hardware numbers don't change. A VPN answers the question, where are you connecting from? It has no opinion at all on which browser is asking. Why a VPN alone fails? The trouble with a VPN for multi-accounting is scale. A popular VPN's exit servers are shared by enormous numbers of unrelated users at once, so the IP you're handed has likely already been used by thousands of other browsers, some of them almost certainly running the same kind of multi-account setup you are. And because a VPN does nothing to the fingerprint, every profile you open behind it still renders identically. 3 accounts behind the same VPN IP from the same unaltered browser are trivially linkable at the device layer, even though the network layer looks different from your home connection. What an anti-detect browser actually does. An anti-detect browser lives on the third layer, device and browser identity. Instead of one browser wearing one fingerprint, it gives you many separate profiles, each carrying its own consistent canvas result, WebGL string, font list, audio signature, time zone, and hardware numbers. Done well, Profile 1 looks like a genuinely different device from Profile 2, and each one holds its story together internally. This is the layer neither incognito nor a VPN ever touches. The actual browser and device signals a site reads underneath the network connection. Why an anti-detect browser alone still isn't enough, but an anti-detect browser has exactly the same blind spot in reverse. It does nothing about the IP. Run 5 perfectly separated, internally consistent profiles out of the same network address, whether that's your home connection or a single shared proxy, and every one of them is still linked at the network layer. No canvas trick required. The browser handles the device story. It has no control at all over the network story, and treating it as a complete solution on its own is one of the most common mistakes operators make. Obvious? A lot of the confusion around Incognito comes from mixing up two different things, cookies and the fingerprint. Clearing cookies, or never letting them save in the first place, is a common piece of privacy advice, and it does something real. It stops a site from recognizing you through a token it planted on your machine last time you visited, but a fingerprint isn't stored anywhere. It's rebooted live from your browser and hardware every single time a page loads, whether or not a single cookie exists. Clear every cookie you have, browse in a fresh Incognito window, and the canvas result, the WebGlen string, the font list all come back identical to last time, because none of that ever lived in a cookie to begin with. Adding a VPN on top of an Antidetect browser. Some operators run a consumer VPN underneath an Antidetect browser instead of a dedicated proxy, and it's worth being specific about why that's a weaker combination. A popular VPN's exit addresses are shared across enormous numbers of unrelated users, and plenty of platforms already maintain lists of known VPN and hosting ranges, flagging traffic from them regardless of what the browser looks like. A dedicated proxy, particularly one on a residential or mobile network, doesn't carry that same red flag by default. The Antidetect browser's half of the work stays identical either way. It's the network half that quietly gets weaker. Dessa net som instruments effective misstepomper. Another path some people try instead of a dedicated Antidetect browser is installing a fingerprint randomizing extension inside their normal, everyday browser. It sounds like the same idea, but it's a meaningfully weaker version of it. The extension is running inside one single browser install that already has its own baseline identity, its own history, its own real profile underneath whatever the extension is overriding, and keeping every overridden value internally consistent from inside an extension is a much harder problem than a browser built for the job from the ground up. And the extension's own presence, or the specific way it alters values, can itself become a recognizable signature. A side-by-side scenario. Picture 3 accounts open 3 different ways. First, 3 incognito windows on one machine, one home IP. A site sees one fingerprint, one IP, 3 accounts, an obvious cluster. Second, 3 normal browser windows behind one shared VPN IP. The IP has changed, but the fingerprint is still identical across all 3, still an obvious cluster, just wearing a different address. Third, 3 separate Antidetect profiles, each paired with its own dedicated proxy. Now the fingerprint differs across all 3, and the IP differs across all 3, and the site has to work considerably harder to find any thread connecting them at all. The "isn't a VPN basically the same thing" myth. This myth is common enough to name directly. A VPN changes where you appear to connect from. It does not touch Canvas, it does not touch WebGL, it does not touch your font list or your audio signature or your reported hardware, and it does nothing for session persistence either. An Antidetect browser and a VPN solve 2 different problems that happen to both fall under the loose idea of hiding who you are, and neither one substitutes for the other, no matter how the marketing on either side gets worded. Identity cost and performance trade-offs. It's worth naming plainly that the correct stack costs real money, and that cost is often the actual limiting factor, not any tool's policy. A dedicated Antidetect browser license and a dedicated proxy per identity both carry a recurring price, and quality varies enormously at every price point. A cheap, shared, poorly maintained proxy can undo an otherwise well-built fingerprint just as easily as no proxy at all. So the spend has to go toward both halves together, not one at the expense of the other. Treating either half as an afterthought because the other one felt like the bigger purchase is a common avoidable mistake. Land and puzzles instead together, even the correct combination, separate profiles paired with separate proxies, is a separation tool, not invisibility. And it's worth being blunt about that. A platform still watches behavior independent of any of this. Typing rhythm, mouse movement, posting patterns, how long an account has existed. A technically perfect setup on an account that behaves like an obvious bot still gets caught, because behavior is read on a completely different axis than fingerprint or network origins. No combination of these 3 tools makes an account unbannable. and treating any of them as a guarantee is the fastest way to get complacent. When the two layers quietly overlap, one last trap worth naming, because it catches people who think they've done everything right. Some anti-detect browsers sell their own bundled proxy marketplace, and some VPN providers resell capacity from the exact same underlying network suppliers. Buy proxies for 5 separate profiles from the same marketplace without checking, and there's a real chance several of them sit in the same address block or even behind the same upstream provider, which narrows the gap between them right back down. Dedicated and separate only counts if the addresses are actually distinct at the network level, not just labeled differently by whichever dashboard sold them to you. What an actually correct stack looks like. Put the pieces where they belong. One persistent, internally consistent browser profile per identity, handling the device layer. One dedicated proxy per identity, handling the network layer, ideally kept stable rather than rotated mid-session, so continuity looks normal. Sessions kept alive and returned to over time rather than wiped and rebuilt from scratch, because a profile that ages naturally looks more like a real returning user than one that resets constantly. Incognito and a bare VPN both have their place, just not this one. Private browsing for your own local history, a VPN for a quick location change, neither one built for keeping multiple identities apart. The full comparisons and which browser plus proxy combinations actually held together under real multi-account testing are written up at antidetectreview.org. Tested hands-on, no affiliate hype attached to any of it. If this cleared something up, subscribe, because next time I'm walking through what happens when two of these get combined badly and exactly which layer an operator forgot. See you in the next one.